The gunshot that killed Martha Collins echoed through the Arizona Territory on a scorching August afternoon in 1882, and her daughter Sarah held the smoking rifle with trembling hands while her 8-month-old son wailed in the wooden cradle by the window. The rattlesnake lay dead on the porch, its fangs still dripping venom, but the damage to their small homestead's reputation was done when 3 ranch hands from the neighboring property saw a woman shooting a gun alone and rode off to spread gossip through the town of Copper Ridge. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up little Thomas, pressing his warm body against her chest while her heart hammered with fear about what people would say, what they would think, and how much harder life would become now that everyone would know for certain that she was raising a baby without a husband. She had come to Arizona 6 months ago with her older sister Martha, both of them fleeing the judgmental whispers of Saint Louis after Sarah's condition became impossible to hide. The man who had promised to marry her, a banker's son named Charles Whitmore, had disappeared the moment she told him about the baby, and his family had paid her father a sum of money to ensure she left town quietly. Martha had been her protector, her champion, the only person who stood by her when their parents turned their backs. They had pooled their savings and bought this small piece of land outside Copper Ridge, planning to start a dressmaking business and build a life where no one knew their story. But Martha had caught fever 3 weeks ago, and despite Sarah's desperate nursing and prayers, her sister had died in the night, leaving Sarah completely alone with an infant and debts she could barely comprehend. The ranch hands' gossip worked faster than wildfire. By the next morning, when Sarah hitched up their old mare to the wagon and drove into town for supplies, she could feel the stares burning into her back. Women pulled their children closer as she passed. Men looked at her with expressions ranging from pity to something far less kind. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, who had always been cordial when Martha accompanied her, now spoke in clipped tones and made it clear her credit was no longer good. She left with half the supplies she needed, and all of her dignity stripped away, Thomas fussing against her shoulder as she tried not to cry in front of the townspeople who had already decided what kind of woman she was. The cowboy first appeared at her property line that evening, sitting tall on a buckskin horse, his hat tilted back to reveal a sun-weathered face that looked to be in his late 20s. Sarah had been hanging laundry with Thomas secured in a sling against her chest, and she froze when she saw the stranger, her mind immediately jumping to all the dangers a lone woman faced on the frontier. He raised one hand in a peaceful gesture and called out in a deep, steady voice that carried across the yard, "Ma'am, I don't mean any trouble. Name's Jacob Thornton. I've been working cattle drives up from Texas, and I'm looking to settle in these parts. Saw your fence needs mending, and I wondered if you might need a hand with repairs." Sarah's first instinct was to send him away, but she looked at the sagging fence posts and the broken gate that she had no idea how to fix, and desperation warred with caution in her chest. "I cannot pay much," she called back, her voice shakier than she wanted it to be. Jacob dismounted slowly, keeping his movements careful and non-threatening. He was tall and lean, built like someone who had spent his whole life working hard, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "I'm not asking for pay, ma'am, just thought neighbors should help neighbors. I'll be working at the Triple Bar Ranch starting next week, but I've got time now." "Why would you help me?" Sarah asked suspiciously, shifting Thomas in the sling. "You don't know me." Something flickered across Jacob's face, a shadow of old pain. "Let's just say I know what it's like when people turn their backs on you when you need help most. And I saw how folks were looking at you in town today. Seemed like you could use someone who wasn't going to judge." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had been so alone, so frightened, and this stranger's simple kindness felt like water in the desert. "The fence posts on the north side are rotting through," she heard herself say, "and the gate won't close properly anymore." Jacob nodded and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "I'll get started tomorrow morning if that suits you. I can camp by the creek tonight if you'll allow it." That night, Sarah lay awake in the small bedroom she had once shared with Martha, listening to Thomas's soft breathing in the cradle beside her bed, and thinking about the cowboy camped by her creek. She knew she should be more careful, more protective of her reputation. But what reputation did she have left to protect? The people of Copper Ridge had already made up their minds about her. At least Jacob Thornton looked at her like she was a person deserving of respect, not a fallen woman to be scorned. Jacob appeared at dawn with tools and lumber he had somehow acquired, and he worked through the morning heat with steady competence. Sarah brought him water and biscuits at midday, Thomas on her hip, and Jacob paused to wipe sweat from his forehead and thank her. His eyes lingered on the baby, and Sarah saw something tender in his expression that made her heart squeeze. "How old is your son?" Jacob asked, keeping his tone casual as he drank deeply from the tin cup. 8 months, Sarah replied, jostling Thomas gently. "His name is Thomas. He's a fine-looking boy." Jacob set down the cup and returned to work without asking the question Sarah could see hovering behind his eyes, and she was grateful for his restraint. The fence took 3 days to complete, and during those 3 days Sarah found herself watching Jacob work from the kitchen window, noticing the careful way he handled tools, the patience he showed when something didn't go right the first time, and the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to his horse. On the 3rd evening, when the work was finished, she invited him to supper because it seemed cruel to send him away with just a thank you after all his labor. They ate stew and cornbread at her small table, Thomas playing with a wooden spoon on a blanket nearby, and the conversation flowed easier than Sarah had expected. Jacob told her about growing up on a small ranch in South Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about working cattle drives for the past decade to survive. He spoke about the loneliness of the trail, the hard men and harder conditions, and his dream of having his own piece of land someday where he could build something lasting. "Why Copper Ridge?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "There are bigger towns with more opportunities." Jacob looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "I'm tired of drifting," he said quietly. "Tired of having nothing that's mine, no place that feels like home. I've saved every penny I could for 10 years, and I've almost got enough to buy a small spread. Copper Ridge seemed like a good place to put down roots. Quiet, good grazing land, and far enough from my past that no one knows me." "What past?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it, and she immediately flushed. "I'm sorry, that was too personal." "No, it's fair." Jacob ran a hand through his hair. "I'm asking you to trust me around your home and your son. You should know who I am. When I was 18, I fell in with some men who turned out to be rustlers. I didn't know what they were doing at first, but when I found out, I was scared and stupid and didn't have the courage to leave. We got caught, and I spent 2 years in the territorial prison. Been working honest ever since, trying to live down that mistake, but it follows me everywhere." Sarah's breath caught. She knew she should be afraid, should send him away immediately, but instead she felt a strange kinship with this man who had made mistakes and been judged for them. "My baby doesn't have a father," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The man who promised to marry me ran away when he found out. My family disowned me. My sister brought me here to give me a fresh start, but she died of fever 3 weeks ago, and now I'm alone with a baby and no way to support us, and a whole town that thinks I'm a sinful woman who doesn't deserve respect." The confession hung in the air between them, and Sarah waited for Jacob to stand up and leave, to add his judgment to everyone else's, but instead he reached across the table and took her hand in his calloused one. "Then we're both people trying to outrun our pasts," he said gently, "and maybe that means we can understand each other better than most." Thomas chose that moment to topple over on his blanket and let out an indignant wail, and Sarah pulled her hand away to scoop him up, embarrassed by how much comfort she had taken from Jacob's touch. Jacob stood and gathered his hat, preparing to leave, but he paused at the door. "I start at the Triple Bar on Monday, but I'll be riding past here most days. If you need anything at all, you just leave a red cloth on your gate and I'll stop by. You shouldn't be alone out here, Sarah. It's not safe, and it's not right." After he left, Sarah held Thomas close and let herself cry for the first time since Martha died. releasing all the fear and grief and loneliness she had been holding inside. But mixed with the tears was a tiny spark of something she was afraid to name, a feeling she had no right to after everything that had happened, a whisper of hope that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Jacob kept his word about riding past, and Sarah found herself inventing reasons to be outside when she heard hoofbeats on the road. He always stopped to check on her, sometimes bringing supplies he claimed were extras from the ranch, sometimes just staying to talk for a few minutes before riding on. The ranch hands at the Triple Bar noticed his attention to the woman outside town, and some of them gave him grief about it. But Jacob's quiet intensity and quick temper when provoked made most men think twice about pushing too hard. 3 weeks after he finished the fence, a storm rolled through with the kind of violent fury that made the desert trembling. Sarah huddled in her small house with Thomas, listening to the thunder shake the walls and watching rain pour through a leak in the roof she hadn't known existed. She was trying to move furniture away from the water when she heard pounding on her door, and she opened it to find Jacob standing in the downpour, soaked through and breathing hard. "I saw the storm coming and worried about you," he said, rain dripping from his hat. "Is everything all right?" Sarah wanted to lie, wanted to pretend she had everything under control, but the relief of seeing him overwhelmed her pride. "The roof is leaking, and I don't know how to stop it." Jacob came inside without hesitation, assessing the situation quickly. He moved her furniture to safety and rigged a temporary patch using oilcloth and boards, working efficiently while Sarah watched with Thomas in her arms. When the immediate crisis was handled, she realized Jacob was shivering from his wet clothes, and she insisted he stay until the storm passed. She gave him a blanket and made hot coffee, and they sat together listening to the rain while Thomas dozed against her shoulder. "You're going to think I'm a terrible mother," Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fix things. I don't know how to provide for him properly. Martha knew so much more than me, and now she's gone, and I'm failing at everything." "You're not failing." Jacob's voice was fierce. "You're surviving impossible circumstances with more courage than most men I've known. Thomas is healthy and happy and loved. That's what matters." "But what happens when winter comes and I don't have enough firewood? What happens when the roof needs real repairs I cannot afford? What happens when he gets sick and I have no money for a doctor?" The fears Sarah had been suppressing came pouring out. "I'm so scared, Jacob. I'm scared every single day." Jacob set down his coffee cup and moved closer. And before Sarah quite knew what was happening, he had wrapped his arms around both her and Thomas in a careful embrace. She stiffened for just a moment, then let herself lean into his warmth, let herself accept the comfort he was offering. They stayed like that while the storm raged outside, and Sarah felt safer than she had in months. "I want to help you," Jacob said quietly, "not just with repairs or supplies. I want to really help you, Sarah, but I don't want to insult you or make you uncomfortable, and I know we haven't known each other long." Sarah pulled back just enough to look at his face, seeing the earnestness there, the genuine care in his creek water eyes. "What are you saying?" Jacob took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I think about you constantly. I'm saying that when I ride past here, my whole day gets better if I see you. I'm saying that I look at Thomas and I don't see shame or scandal. I just see a beautiful baby who deserves a father to protect him and teach him and love him. And I'm saying that if you would consider it, I would be honored to court you properly, to see if we could build something together." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. "Jacob, you don't have to rescue me. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about rescue or obligation." Jacob's voice was steady and sure. "This is about the fact that I haven't felt connected to another person in over a decade until I met you. This is about the fact that when I imagine my future now, I see you and Thomas in it, and that vision makes me happier than any dream I've had before. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but out here life is hard and short, and when you find something good, you don't let it slip away because the timing isn't perfect." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but for once they were not tears of despair. "I'm broken. Jacob, I'm ruined in the eyes of everyone who matters. Why would you tie yourself to someone like me?" Jacob reached up and gently wiped her tears away with his thumb. "You're not broken. You're brave. And I don't give a damn what the people of Copper Ridge think. I've been judged my whole adult life for one mistake I made as a scared kid. I know what it's like to be labeled and dismissed. But I also know that those judgments don't define us. Our actions define us. And your actions show me a woman with strength and integrity and a capacity for love that takes my breath away." Thomas stirred in Sarah's arms and made a small sound, and Jacob looked down at the baby with such tenderness that Sarah's last defenses crumbled. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would like that very much. I would like to see where this could go." Jacob's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, bright and full of promise. He leaned forward slowly, giving Sarah every chance to pull away, and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful and full of restrained emotion, and Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest for the first time since Charles Whitmore had destroyed her faith in men. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Jacob came to see her every chance he got, always bringing something useful: a bag of sugar, nails for repairs, a rocking horse he had carved for Thomas. He treated her with respect and genuine affection, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always mindful of her reputation even though it was already tattered. He played with Thomas with such natural ease that Sarah's heart ached watching them, seeing the baby light up whenever Jacob walked through the door, hearing Thomas's delighted giggles when Jacob tossed him gently in the air. But Copper Ridge was not a forgiving town. The gossip about Sarah and Jacob spread quickly, and the judgment intensified. Women who had merely avoided Sarah before now made pointed comments within her hearing about loose morals and the type of man who would involve himself with a fallen woman. The preacher stopped by one Sunday to inform Sarah that she was not welcome at church services unless she showed proper repentance for her sins, and when Jacob heard about it, his fury was cold and controlled in a way that actually frightened Sarah a little. "That sanctimonious hypocrite," Jacob said, pacing her small kitchen like a caged animal. "I've seen him drunk on Saturday nights at the saloon making crude jokes with the ranch hands. He has no right to judge you." "Maybe he's right, though," Sarah said quietly, jostling Thomas, who was teething and fussy. "Maybe I should repent. Maybe I should accept that I deserve this treatment." Jacob stopped pacing and came to stand in front of her, taking her shoulders gently. "Look at me, Sarah. You made a mistake in trusting the wrong man. That doesn't make you evil or irredeemable. That makes you human. Thomas is not a sin. He's a blessing. And anyone who cannot see that is too blind to deserve your concern." Sarah looked up into Jacob's face and saw absolute conviction there, saw belief in her worth that she had not felt from anyone except Martha. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" she whispered. "I'm the lucky one," Jacob said. And then he kissed her properly for the first time, a sweet and searching kiss that made Sarah's toes curl and her heart race. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas let out a loud squawk of protest at being squished between them, and they laughed together, the tension broken into something lighter and more joyful. But their happiness was fragile, and the hostility of the town was a constant pressure. Things came to a head in October when Sarah needed to buy winter supplies and took Thomas into Copper Ridge on a Wednesday morning. She was in the general store carefully counting her limited coins when 3 women from the church auxiliary came in and began speaking loudly about the scandal of unwed mothers and the cowboys who enabled their sinful behavior. The comments were clearly directed at Sarah, and she felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as she tried to complete her purchases quickly. "I heard she's trying to trap that Thornton fellow," one woman said in a carrying voice, "using that baby to snare herself a husband. Shameless." "Well, what can you expect from a woman like that?" another replied. "She probably doesn't even know who the real father is." Sarah's hands shook as she gathered her parcels, but before she could flee, a strong hand touched her elbow. She looked up to find Jacob standing beside her, his face like a thunderstorm, and she had not even known he was in town. "Ladies," Jacob said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I suggest you think very carefully before you continue speaking ill of the woman I intend to marry." The store went absolutely silent. Sarah's heart stopped. The three women stared at Jacob with matching expressions of shock and disapproval. Mr. Peterson paused in the middle of measuring flour. "My baby doesn't have a father," Sarah said, her voice breaking because she could not let Jacob ruin his reputation further for her sake. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked up at him desperately. "Jacob, you don't have to do this. You don't have to tie yourself to my shame." Jacob turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his while Thomas gurgled between them in the sling Sarah wore. His eyes were blazing with emotion, with love and determination and absolute certainty. "Yes, he does now," Jacob said clearly, loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "I'll be his pa always. If you'll have me, Sarah, I'll marry you tomorrow and spend the rest of my life being the father Thomas deserves and the husband you deserve. I love you. I love him, and I don't care who knows it or what they think about it." Sarah could not speak through her tears, could only nod frantically as joy and disbelief and overwhelming love crashed over her in waves. Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her and Thomas both, and Sarah heard him whisper against her hair, "I've got you now. Both of you. Always." The women from the church auxiliary left the store in a huff of righteous indignation, but Sarah did not care. Let them talk. Let the whole town gossip. She had found something real and precious and worth fighting for, and she was not going to let society's judgment steal it away. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony performed by the Justice of the Peace, with the foreman from the Triple Bar Ranch and his wife serving as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that had been Martha's, and she held Thomas throughout the brief proceedings. When Jacob slipped a plain gold band onto her finger and promised to love and honor her all his days, Sarah felt like she was being given a second chance at life, an opportunity to build happiness from the ruins of her past mistakes. The ranch hands at the Triple Bar gave Jacob grief about taking on another man's child, but he shut down that talk fast and hard, making it clear that anyone who disrespected his wife or son would answer to him personally. Jacob had a reputation as someone who was slow to anger but formidable when pushed, and most men decided it was not worth testing him. Jacob moved into Sarah's small homestead, and suddenly, the house that had felt so empty and frightening was full of warmth and life. He took over the heavy work without being asked, repairing the roof properly and chopping enough firewood to see them through the winter and reinforcing the barn. In the evenings, after supper was cleared, he would play with Thomas on the floor, making the baby laugh with silly faces and gentle roughhousing while Sarah watched with a full heart. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment as they learned each other's rhythms and habits, but the underlying foundation of respect and genuine affection made the challenges manageable. Jacob was patient with Sarah's occasional nightmares about Charles Whitmore holding her when she woke gasping and afraid that this new happiness was just a dream. Sarah learned that Jacob struggled with guilt over his time in prison, that he sometimes woke in the night convinced he did not deserve the life they were building, and she learned to soothe him with soft words and gentle touches that reminded him he was not defined by his worst moment. Thomas thrived with Jacob in his life, growing from a baby into a curious toddler who followed his pa everywhere, mimicking Jacob's gestures and chattering in nonsense that Jacob treated like serious conversation. When Thomas spoke his first clear word and it was pa directed at Jacob, Sarah saw tears in her husband's eyes, and he scooped the boy up and held him close for a long moment. "Thank you," Jacob said to Sarah that night as they lay together in the darkness. "Thank you for trusting me with him, for giving me the honor of being his father." "You are his father," Sarah said firmly, "in every way that matters. Blood doesn't make a parent. Love does, and you love him completely." Jacob pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you both more than I knew it was possible to love anything." The people of Copper Ridge slowly, grudgingly began to accept the Thornton family. It helped that Jacob was respected at the Triple Bar as a hard worker and honest man, and it helped that Sarah kept her head high and refused to act ashamed of her family. They were never fully embraced by the church auxiliary or the more socially prominent families, but they found friends among the other outsiders and working-class families who understood that life was complicated, and judgment was easy when you had never faced real hardship. A year after their marriage, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again, and the joy mixed with terror in her heart was almost overwhelming. Her pregnancy with Thomas had been shrouded in shame and fear, but this time, Jacob was beside her every step, excited and protective and endlessly reassuring. When her belly began to swell, he would rest his hand there in wonder, feeling the baby kick and talking to Sarah about the future they were building. "Do you think Thomas will be jealous?" Sarah asked one evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold. Thomas was playing with his wooden horse in the yard, making clip-clop sounds. "He'll adjust," Jacob said confidently. "He's got a good heart, just like his mama. We'll make sure he knows he's just as loved and important, that being the big brother is a special job." Sarah leaned against Jacob's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I never thought I could be this happy. After everything that happened, I thought my life was over, that I would spend forever being punished for one mistake. But you gave me hope again. You gave me a reason to believe in love." Jacob kissed the top of her head. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was drifting, angry at the world, convinced I would always be alone because of my past. You showed me that redemption was possible, that I could be more than my mistakes. We healed each other, Sarah." Their daughter was born on a spring morning in 1884, arriving with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair like her father's. They named her Martha, after Sarah's sister. And when Jacob held his daughter for the first time, Sarah saw the transformation in his face, the wonder and fierce protectiveness and overwhelming love. Thomas, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her tiny hands and watch her sleep, and Jacob patiently taught him how to be gentle and helpful. The homestead prospered slowly but surely under Jacob's management. He had a gift for ranching, for understanding the land and the animals, and he saved every extra penny toward his dream of buying their own cattle. Sarah started her dressmaking business again, finding customers among the ranch wives and working-class women who appreciated her skill and fair prices. It was hard work raising 2 small children while also trying to earn money, but Sarah had never been afraid of hard work, and she had Jacob's unwavering support. 2 years after Martha's birth, Jacob came home from town with barely suppressed excitement in his eyes. He swept Sarah into his arms and spun her around, laughing at her surprised yelp. "What has gotten into you?" Sarah demanded, though she was laughing too. "The Harris place is for sale," Jacob said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Old man Harris died, and his children don't want a ranch. It's 160 acres with a good water source and grazing rights. Sarah, it's exactly what I've been saving for. We could buy it, run our own cattle, build our own legacy." Sarah's breath caught. She knew how much this dream meant to Jacob, how hard he had worked toward it. "Can we afford it?" Jacob's grin was infectious. "Just barely. It'll be tight for the first few years, but I know we can make it work. What do you say, Mrs. Thornton? Ready to be ranchers?" They bought the Harris place in the fall of 1886, and the whole family threw themselves into making it their own. Jacob worked from dawn to dusk building up the herd and improving the property, while Sarah managed the household and continued her sewing to bring in extra income. Thomas, now 4, took his role as big brother and helper seriously, watching Martha when Sarah needed to work and trying to imitate Jacob's ranching tasks. The work was exhausting, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. The ranch slowly gained a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Jacob's past as an ex-convict still followed him in whispers, and Sarah's history was not forgotten, but respect for their hard work and integrity gradually overpowered the old gossip. They were never going to be society leaders in Copper Ridge, but they earned the regard of people who mattered, the working families and honest businessmen who judge character over scandal. As the children grew, Jacob made sure Thomas always knew the truth, that he had loved him and claimed him by choice, not by blood. On Thomas's 7th birthday, Jacob took the boy out to check the cattle, just the two of them, and had a conversation Sarah knew was important even though she was not privy to the details. Thomas came back with red-rimmed eyes but a peaceful expression, and he hugged Jacob tight and said, "You're the best pa in the whole world." Jacob held his son close, and Sarah saw him mouth "thank you" in her direction over Thomas's head, his eyes wet with emotion. Martha grew into a spirited girl with her father's eyes and her mother's determination, never letting her older brother boss her around, and earning Jacob's delighted laughter with her sass and cleverness. The two children were close despite their occasional squabbles, united by the secure knowledge that they were loved and wanted. In 1889, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that brought joy mixed with trepidation since she was now 33 and worried about the risks. But Jacob's steady presence and confidence helped calm her fears, and their second son was born healthy and strong that winter. They named him Jacob Jr., but called him Jake from the beginning to avoid confusion. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family and quiet happiness. The ranch continued to grow, and Jacob eventually hired 2 hands to help with the work, allowing him to spend more time with his family. Sarah's dressmaking business became well established, and she even hired a young woman from town to help with the overflow of orders. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and secure, and that was worth more than gold. Thomas grew into a young man who was steady and responsible, with Jacob's integrity and Sarah's kindness. When he turned 16, Jacob officially adopted him in a legal proceeding that made Thomas cry with happiness and pride. Martha became a skilled rider and ranch hand, insisting she could do anything her brothers could do and generally proving it. Jake was the baby, charming and mischievous, keeping his parents on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Sarah on a picnic to the creek where he had first camped all those years ago. The children were staying with a neighboring family, and it was just the two of them under the Arizona sky, older and weathered by life, but still deeply in love. "Do you remember the day we met?" Jacob asked, pulling Sarah close as they watched the water flow past. "I rode up to your place scared out of my mind that you would send me away, but hoping maybe I could help somehow. I remember thinking you were either an angel or a madman to offer help to someone like me," Sarah said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I was so broken, Jacob, so lost and afraid. And you saw me as someone worth saving. You were always worth saving. You were always strong and brave and beautiful. I just helped you remember it." Jacob tilted her face up to his. "You gave me everything, Sarah. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me Thomas when I thought I would never have the chance to be a father. You gave me Martha and Jake. You gave me a reason to believe in myself again." "My baby doesn't have a father," Sarah said softly, echoing the words she had spoken a decade ago in that general store. "That's what I told myself for so long, that Thomas would grow up without a father because of my mistakes. But I was wrong." "Yes, he does now," Jacob replied, repeating the promise he had made all those years ago. "I'll be his pa always, and I'll be your husband always. Until my last breath, Sarah, I will love you and our children with everything I have." They kissed as the sun set over the land they had built together, 2 broken people who had found wholeness in each other, 2 outcasts who had created their own family and their own happiness despite a world that tried to tear them down. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas met a nice girl from a neighboring ranch, a quiet young woman named Emily who loved books and had a gift for training horses. Jacob and Sarah watched their eldest son court and eventually marry, feeling the bittersweet pride of parents watching their child become an adult. When Emily gave birth to their first grandchild, a boy they named Jacob Thomas in honor of both grandfathers, Sarah cried tears of joy holding the tiny bundle and thinking about how far they had all come. Martha shocked everyone by deciding to go to the teachers' college in Tucson, determined to get an education and bring that knowledge back to Copper Ridge. Jacob was incredibly proud of his daughter's ambition, though he missed her terribly when she was away. She came home for holidays full of stories and ideas, and eventually opened a school for ranch children who lived too far from town to attend regular classes. Jake, the youngest, took to ranching like he was born to it. And by the time he was 18, he was managing much of the day-to-day operations and allowing Jacob to slow down a bit. Jacob's hair had gone silver at the temples, and his hands were gnarled from decades of hard work, but he was content in a way he had never imagined possible as a bitter, young ex-convict. Sarah's hair also showed silver threads, and the years had etched lines around her eyes and mouth, but Jacob thought she was more beautiful than ever. She had grown into her strength, into her confidence, no longer the frightened girl who had been abandoned and judged, but a woman who knew her worth and commanded respect. On a warm evening in 1899, the whole family gathered at the ranch for Thomas and Emily's anniversary celebration. The house rang with laughter and children's voices, with the clatter of dishes and the warmth of family. Thomas's 3 children played with their younger uncle Jake, who at 20 was barely more than a kid himself. Martha entertained everyone with stories from her teaching adventures. Emily and Sarah worked together in the kitchen with the easy companionship of women who loved each other. Jacob stood on the porch watching it all, his heart so full it almost hurt. Thomas came to stand beside him, a grown man now with children of his own, but still the little boy Jacob had claimed as his son in a general store 17 years ago. "What are you thinking about, Pa?" Thomas asked. Jacob put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am for every single day of this life. I'm thinking about how one decision to stop and offer help to a woman in need changed everything for me. I'm thinking about how proud I am of the man you have become." Thomas leaned into his father's embrace. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You chose me, Pa. You didn't have to, but you chose me and loved me and raised me. You gave me a name and a family and a future. I could never thank you enough." "Being your father has been the greatest honor of my life," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "You, Martha, Jake, you 3 are my legacy, and I could not be prouder." Sarah came out to join them, slipping her hand into Jacob's and smiling at her husband and son. "What are my 2 favorite men plotting out here?" "Just appreciating our blessings," Jacob said, kissing her temple. They stood together as the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, 3 people who had been lost and broken and had found each other and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Inside the house, the family they had created together laughed and celebrated, a testament to the power of love and redemption and the choice to see worth in people that society had deemed worthless. Years continued to flow like the creek on their property, steady and persistent. Jacob and Sarah grew older with grace, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved them fiercely. The ranch prospered under Jake's management, and Thomas built his own successful operation on adjacent land. Martha eventually married a fellow teacher and had 2 children of her own, balancing her career and her family with the same determination she brought to everything. The people of Copper Ridge who had once judged Sarah and Jacob so harshly found themselves forced to acknowledge the success and integrity of the Thornton family. Some of the old gossips never softened, but their voices became increasingly irrelevant as the younger generation saw only a family that worked hard and loved each other and contributed to the community. When Jacob was 63, he had a mild heart scare that terrified Sarah and made him slow down even more. The doctor ordered rest, and for once Jacob listened, letting his children take over more of the work and spending his days with Sarah, talking about old memories and watching their grandchildren play in the yard where Thomas had once toddled as a baby. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked him one afternoon as they sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, a picture of old-age domestic contentment. Jacob thought about it seriously. "No," he said finally. "My life wasn't easy, and I made plenty of mistakes when I was young, but everything I went through led me to you and our family. How could I regret that?" "I used to regret so much," Sarah admitted. I regretted trusting Charles. I regretted the pain I caused my family. I regretted being so naive and foolish. But then I realized that without all that pain, I would never have come to Arizona. I would never have met you. Thomas wouldn't exist. And I cannot imagine a world without our children, without this life we built. Jacob reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. We saved each other, Sarah. We gave each other permission to move beyond our mistakes and build something good. That's the legacy I want to leave, not just to our children, but to anyone who has ever felt defined by their worst moment. Redemption is possible. Love can heal. And family is what you make it, not just what blood gives you. Sarah squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. I love you, Jacob Thornton. I have loved you from the moment you promised to be Thomas's father, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Sarah Thornton. You made me a better man. You gave me a reason to be better. And you gave me the family I dreamed of but never thought I deserved. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked and loved for decades. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was richer and fuller than either had dared to dream. The years were kind to them, granting them long lives and the chance to see their grandchildren grow and even meet a few great-grandchildren. Jacob lived to 78, passing peacefully in his sleep with Sarah beside him and his children, and grandchildren filling the house with love and memories. Sarah grieved deeply but found comfort in their family and in the knowledge that Jacob had lived a full and happy life, that he had died surrounded by the people he loved most. She lived another 6 years, staying sharp and engaged, telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the early days, about coming to Arizona Territory as a frightened young mother and meeting a cowboy who saw her worth when no one else did. She talked about building the ranch, about hard winters and difficult times, about the slow process of earning respect and creating a place in a world that had rejected them both. Thomas was with her when she passed, holding her hand just as she had held his throughout his childhood. Her last words were about Jacob, about how she could feel him waiting for her, and how she was ready to be with him again. She died with a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that she had lived well, that she had loved deeply, and that her legacy would continue in the family they had built together. At her funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered crowd of family and friends and told the story of his parents' meeting, of how Jacob had promised to be his father and kept that promise every single day of his life. He talked about the courage it took for both of them to build a life together despite society's judgment, about the love that had sustained them through hard times, and about the lesson they taught about redemption and second chances. My mother used to tell me that she thought her life was over when I was born, Thomas said, his voice steady despite his grief. She thought she had made an irredeemable mistake. But my pa showed her that mistakes don't define us, that love is stronger than judgment, and that family is built on commitment and choice as much as blood. They gave me everything, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor their memory by living with the same integrity and love they showed me. The Thornton Ranch stayed in the family for generations, a testament to the foundation Jacob and Sarah had built. Their story became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when the world turns its back, love and commitment and the courage to choose family can create something beautiful and lasting. In the family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones sat side by side. Jacob Thornton, beloved husband and father. Sarah Thornton, beloved wife and mother. And beneath those simple words, an inscription that captured the essence of their story. Love sees worth where the world sees shame. Love builds families where blood cannot. Love redeems and heals and endures forever. Their legacy was not just the land or the cattle or the material success they had built, though those things mattered. Their true legacy was the understanding that every person deserves compassion, that mistakes are not the end of the story, and that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to create through love and commitment rather than the ones we are born into. Thomas lived to be 86, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all knew the story of how a cowboy had promised to be a father to a baby who was not his blood, and how that promise had changed everything. He passed on the values Jacob and Sarah had taught him about integrity and hard work and the importance of seeing people's worth beyond their mistakes. The town of Copper Ridge, which had once been so quick to judge and condemn, eventually embraced the Thornton family story as part of its own history, a reminder of both its failings and its capacity for growth. The general store where Jacob had made his declaration still stood, and locals would sometimes point it out to visitors and tell the story of the cowboy and the young mother and the promise that built a dynasty. And through it all, through the generations and the changing times, the essential truth remained. Love had conquered judgment. Commitment had overcome scandal. And a frightened woman and a drifting cowboy had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. A family and a legacy rooted in the simple but profound decision to choose love over fear, acceptance over judgment, and family over the narrow definitions of blood and propriety. Their story was not perfect or without struggle, but it was real and true and ultimately triumphant, a testament to the power of human connection and the redemptive nature of love freely given and gratefully received. And that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind.